Today's Cabinet meeting on Wednesday, 10th of July, here at the Town Hall at 6 p.m. Welcome to everyone who is joining us here today. Apologies for absence. I don't think we have had any notified from Cabinet members. Tom Hook has sent his apologies as he's on leave. Sorry.
Councillor Ed Turner is likely to be late and/or absent thanks to cross-country trains' inability to run trains. Wherever.
Yes, whatever the weather. Yes, okay.
And if I could just register, Mish cycle chain snapped on the way here, so he's trying to get home to join virtually.
Oh dear. Okay, so various tragic transport issues today. So sorry to hear both of those. Declarations of interest. Has anyone got any that they need to make? Not seeing any. Thank you. We have no addresses and questions by members of the public notified, no council addresses notified, either on items on the agenda or on neighbourhood issues, and no items notified by Cabinet members. So that takes us on to scrutiny reports. And Catherine, I think you're joining us online. So
that's right. Thank you very much. So thank you. I'd just like to update you that the scrutiny committee met on the 2nd of July, and we considered a number of items, 3 cabinet reports and also a report that's due to go to council on the 15th of July. So we looked at the Citizen Experience Strategy Progress Report, the City Council's corporate strategy, update of bylaws for parks and open spaces, and also the leisure investment programme document. So the committee didn't make any recommendations with respect to the first item, which was the Citizen Experience Strategy Progress Report, but we welcomed the update on that. And then with the other items, there were 7 recommendations across the 3 reports. So I'm going to turn to the first item, which was the City Council Corporate Strategy 24 to 28. And thank you, Councillor Brown, for attending, and officers as well for supporting and answering our questions related to this. There were 3 themes that sort of emerged from that. There were questions around ensuring an inclusive city. There was the theme of reducing inequalities, and also some questions related to the deliverability of the strategy as well. So maybe just to recap on a couple of these items. So it was really looking at kind of the level of detail that should be in this document compared to some of the operational plans, and so some questions around that. We explored the topic of child-friendly cities as well, and whether that had been considered within the process, and also looking at the financial realities when it comes to local government funding, and whether that was going to influence the deliverability of the strategy itself. So with that in mind, there were the 3 recommendations that came out of this, which I think you have before you for consideration. And the first is that we were recommending that whilst you were considering age-friendly cities, this focus around a child-friendly city as part of that would be welcomed, and we would recommend that, partly because of the declining numbers of children within the city, in part. We noted that that is to do with some of the housing crisis issues and affordability, but there's some issues there. There was a call from us to explicitly reference the Child Poverty Review Group and adopt the adoption of the socioeconomic duty within the strategy, and then also just make it very clear that this is activity that isn't necessarily funded, all of it, so making that distinction between what's funded and not. So I'll pause there for Cabinet member response at this time. I know you haven't considered yet this, but you do have draft responses. So
yes, thanks, Catherine. I have agreed responses actually. So they are on the agenda. So in terms of the first recommendation, whilst we were not really able to add into the document itself responses on child-friendly city, I did set out for you in the comments what we're already doing on that, which specifically references the work that Councillor Louise Upton and various council officers are doing in relation to how to make our city work for young children. So whilst I think it's probably a bit premature to put it into the strategy itself, I just wanted to assure scrutiny that we are doing some work in that area, and it also sets out some of the other work that we're doing around making our city child friendly. I think what we don't fully understand is what it would mean to say we are making our city a child-friendly city, and therefore we're not prepared to put it into the strategy at this stage. In relation to the adoption of the socio-economic duty, that has been added in to the draft council strategy. We haven't referenced the work of the Child Poverty Review Group, not because we don't value it, because it was extremely useful, but simply because this is a forward-looking document rather than a backward-looking document, and therefore it just didn't seem quite appropriate. And then the final recommendation was to make more explicit reference to the fact that some of the aims in the strategy may not be fully met if funding is not available, and that has been put in a reference to the council's ability to meet its 2030 and 2040 net zero targets being subject to additional external funding specifically has been added. And obviously this document does sit alongside and informs our budget and medium-term financial plan. So I hope that meets your requirements. Well, it may not entirely meet your requirements, but that's our response anyway.
Okay, thank you. I mean, one thing for your consideration as you go through this today is that with the first item, I think you say yes in the draft cabinet response, but what I'm hearing is actually it wouldn't necessarily, this age and child friendly point might not necessarily make it into the document itself. But I think what is just so maybe that's a partial rather than agree. But what but I am hearing agreement in the substance of sort of the intention rather.
So actually, Catherine, if I may just address that's the one thing that isn't correct on here, because I took out all of the agrees. I never, in my responses to scrutiny, say yes or no. I just give you the verbal response, because I don't think it's ever as simple as just saying yes or no. And that's why I think the narrative response is far more helpful. So I don't quite know where these yeses have appeared from, but they weren't agreed by me.
Okay, well, that's,
so we should amend the records to that effect.
That's helpful. But I do welcome the fact, I'm sure scrutiny does, the fact that the intention is there to be exploring this very concretely going forward. So thank you for that. In terms of then the next item, which was the update on bylaws for parks and open spaces, thank you to Councillor McCongay and officers for attending and briefing us on this. Just to summarise the kind of areas of discussion, we were exploring influencing the university parks policies for their bylaws, concerns around encouraging, or concerns that tree climbing would be encouraged because there was no explicit ban on that, and there were potential public liability issues or issues in terms of nesting birds. And then there were questions also raised by scrutiny on the process around adopting updated bylaws sort of going forward. There were some concrete recommendations in two areas, and this really related to this issue of the definition of a bike, recognising that we see increasingly e-bikes on the streets of Oxford, some of which possibly are not legal and going far faster than they should, and this could present a risk to those walking through parks. And so there was this call to potentially consider this incorporation of a speed restriction for cycling in park bylaws. So that was one recommendation. And the second was noting that policing the bylaws is a challenge. It might be worth putting public information up about how to report antisocial behaviour, so that people's concerns around this are addressed, or at least they know where to turn. So those were the items that we came back on this report for. So thank you.
So, Chairman Congai, to respond.
Thanks, Catherine. We did actually agree in part to the first recommendation of restricting the bylaw speeding on the e-bikes. As we discussed in the scrutiny, it's very, very difficult to enforce the speed limit, but we went further to agree the definition that is in the scrutiny response there because we thought that works and can be covered if somebody's cycling erratically with other bylaws. For the fact that we can't enforce the speed limit, we thought we agree this in part. And the second recommendation, we 100% agree to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. And
Thank
Catherine,
you.
back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So the final report was the leisure investment programme. We've noted that there were some confidential items that we did look at offline on this, but our recommendations weren't related to those elements. The main discussion, and again, thank you, Councillor Makongei and officers for attending on this. We really focused around the usage of the sports hall at the Lees Leisure Centre and usage patterns there. And this was related to fitting some sort of soft play equipment in part of the facility, which would potentially displace evening users of the sports hall. And so the concern was that we need to maintain adequate access to the sports hall space at the times where there is maybe full or overcapacity usage. And so it was suggested that there were some communications, I understand much has already happened with different user groups around this, but that there could be some work around the usage of that specific sports hall to ensure that there are mitigations around the reduced capacity that would result of moving some of that space for this soft play equipment. So one recommendation was very specific to that point, and then the second recommendation that we made was around given the previous performance of the previous contractor in leisure management, that progress reports are or progress is provided in a public form on the leisure investment programme delivery to provide an assurance to the public and greater transparency around this new provider, where we know that some concerns have raised because of historic record of their predecessor. So yeah, those two areas of recommendations were put forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Joe?
Thanks, Catherine. I'll start with the second recommendation because we 100% agree with that one. And actually, it puts us in check, especially me as a cabinet member, to make sure that we are running and monitoring our leisure provider 100%. So we agree on that. On the first recommendation, we just put a little bit of an amendment to that because obviously there are a lot of groups that are impacted, and we are actually having conversation and taking the case by case basis. So we'll continue monitor the usage, and where appropriate try to protect against the disproportionate affecting one group to another. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. And obviously you're very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting or to go off and do something else if you prefer. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Right, thanks a lot. So the next item, substantive item on the agenda is the leisure investment programme that we have just been discussing. So segues nicely into it. So Joe, Hagan and James, over to you.
Thank you. I will introduce the report. I can now say that the contract transfer has been successful, and we are now in contract management. The report before you is asking for a further 1.4 million to improve our leisure services. If you remember, comrades, when we were discussing the contract, we did actually allow 2 million in our budget for the improvement. So it was the money that was supposed to be invested so that our leisure centers can come to market to good condition renovation, so that the new provider can have the investment that is required and give us a return. Obviously, it will be very difficult for the new provider to make money if our existing centers are in a dilapidated situation. So I'm asking you to support the report, because if we won't approve this report, then we have difficulties for the leisure provider to give us the return we require. In the life of the contract, we're going to receive significant returns for the benefits of the council that is going to be invested in other council services. So I recommend that report to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Hagan and James, did you want to add anything?
Thanks ever so much, Chair. I would just say, I mean, that's great and a really thorough intro by Councillor Mkonge there. With the leisure contract, there were really clear aims at the outset. You know, that's very much around keeping our centres open, but keeping them in really good care and making sure we're getting the right investment. So as part of this, as part of the procurement process, More Leisure obviously put forward what we feel is a really exciting list of improvements, and they very much include, you know, improvements to gyms, improvements to pool facilities, so new inflatables, reopening cafes, real investment into our changing facilities, so stuff that our customers and citizens will really see as marked improvements, and certainly help us to enable obviously return investment that Councillor Mkonge relates to, but also our active communities outcomes. So really enabling, you know, concessionary access, but also you know, trying to reduce inequalities, health inequalities as well.
Thanks, Hagan. Absolutely, I think it's a very exciting programme of work, and it should make some real improvements to facilities that have, in some cases at least, become a bit tired. James, did you want to add anything?
Thanks, Chair. No, Hagan and Councillor Mkonge have summed up nicely. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions or comments? No. Okay. Well, in that case, can we move to the recommendations, which are to grant project approval for the investment programme. We are making recommendations to council around the budget, and we are also being asked to recommend delegations of authority to make the payments. Is everyone happy to agree those recommendations? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hagan and James. It's a nice and easy one. So on to the next item on the agenda, which is the redesignation of the neighbourhood forums for Wolvercote and Summertown and St Margaret's. So Louise, over to you on this one, and I think we're joined by Alex and Will.
Yeah. Thank you. So the Localism Act 2011 provided for a way for interested local communities to get directly involved in planning how their area develops. In order to do that, they have to come together and form a neighbourhood forum and then produce a neighbourhood plan. And then if that plan is adopted, it becomes part of the statutory development plan and is used. It becomes very important for considering decisions on planning applications in that area alongside the council's own planning documents. Now, part of the way that the Act allowed for the formation of these neighbourhood forums meant that they only ever last for 5 years, and after that they have to be redesignated. So we currently have these two in the city, the Summertown and St Margaret's, and the Wolvercote one. They were first approved in January 2014 and then again in March 2019. So we're 5 years on from that again, and they both need to be redesignated. Each neighbourhood forum application is linked to a designated area. The maps for these are shown in Appendix 1. They're unchanged from the original maps, which means that they now don't quite follow ward boundaries because they're on old ward boundaries, but that they've kept the same outline that they always had. Importantly, it's not just a rubber stamping of redesignated them. They have to be sort of rejudged again on the same criteria as the initial application was. And they have been judged against those criteria, which are in paragraphs 5 and 6. And I guess one thing of note is that having a neighbourhood plan means that the neighbourhood portion of any SIL money, community infrastructure levy receipts generated from applications within that forum area, now 25% of that gets spent in that area, is dedicated to be spent in that area, rather than the sort of the 15% that is normal across the rest of the city. So we'll be asking you to approve recommendation of those. I don't know whether Alex would like to add something to that or not.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. No, I've not got too much to add. The only thing I'd say is that the consultation feedback we received for both neighbourhood redesignations was very positive, and we'll be returning all our comments back to the forums themselves so they can see what was said.
Thanks very much, Alex. And Will, did you want to add anything?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thanks very much. Has anyone got any questions or comments on this report? I think it's very straightforward. So thank you very much for your work on this. I think we just move straight to the recommendations, which are to approve the 2 redesignations. So can we agree that? Thank you very much. Okay, we are now moving on to item 10, which is the homelessness, temporary accommodation demand and mitigations. Linda, over to you. And I think we're also joined by Kieran and Richard. So, and Nerys, sorry.
Thank you. The previous government failed on housing and homelessness, thanks to their economic failures, their failure to support house building, their failure to support private renters. We're now seeing unprecedented numbers of people being made homeless, unprecedented numbers of people presenting to the council as homeless, and an unprecedented number of people within that we owe a statutory duty to house, and that we're having to put up in temporary accommodation while we find them a permanent home to move on to. So this report sets out the scale of the situation we're in, and yes, it is. So the scale of the situation in terms of the number of people involved. So we've got 134 units of temporary accommodation, and for years that has been enough. But most recently, it hasn't been. The number of people in temporary accommodation has doubled just in the last year. And in April this year, we had 123 households in nightly charge accommodation, i.e. hotels or bed and breakfasts, which is an appalling situation for those people, especially families with children that they need to get to school, or people that need to come in to the city to work. And just 1 year ago, that number was 12. And the year before that, the number was 2. So this is a new demand being placed upon us. And putting people up in hotels like that, as well as being bad for the people involved, it's also expensive for the council, because we can't recoup the whole charge, the whole cost of doing that, and it's predicted that it will incur an extra £3 million a year that we haven't budgeted for and able to deal with this demand. It would have been a lot more if it hadn't been for the work that has already taken place to reduce the costs and keep the numbers of people in temporary accommodation down as far as we can. But there is a whole lot more work we need to do. And this report asks for the authorisation and the delegations in order to allow officers to go off and do that work. And I'll hand over to them so they can tell you a bit more about those mitigations. But I just would say that we did try and reach out to the last government to ask them to support us on this, and they were very unhelpful and actually refused to turn down our request for a meeting. So we will be renewing our efforts with the new government, telling them how they can support us on this, and I'm hopeful they'll be more receptive. But yeah, Richard and Nerys are here, and to go through the mitigations if you'd like to hear more about them.
Thanks very much, Linda, and I think we would. So Nerys and Richard, over to you. And I know you've got
Thank
Kieran
you.
online too.
So Councillor Smith's already kind of painted the very challenging picture that we face. What the paper sets out are a series of mitigations that are either currently being deployed and have been developed, but also more that we are in the process of developing, and we may need to return to Cabinet later in the year with those as they develop further. I won't go through every single one now, because there's many in the paper at different stages. But probably just what I would emphasise is that we're looking at, they can probably be grouped in three ways. So we are seeking to increase the amount of TA stock the council has. So we've got somewhere to put people in that's also cheaper to the council and better quality for them. We have mitigations around prevention, trying to prevent the placements in the first place and keep people in their homes or move them before they become homeless to avoid the costs of TA and that experience. And then finally, we're also looking to increase our move on. So more stock then to move people on from temporary accommodation to make a home in the city or beyond. I hope it's a comprehensive package that you can see tonight, and we are really trying everything to bring those numbers down and with it costs.
Thanks very much, Richard. Nerys, did you want to add anything?
I'll just add a couple of things, just a sort of reflection on the complexity of where people are coming from. And there are multiple demands really coming into the service from multiple different areas. I think we try to sort of describe that best we can, so that we're kind of targeting our prevention into the right areas. I mean, we reference the fact that we have a home office hotel. We have a significant pressure from singles whilst we are starting to sort of wrestle back some control on families. So there's a direct link between that and our one-bed supply, referencing Linda's point about build, etc., and our conversations with Workplace. So I think just a bit of context in terms of where the demand is coming from.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would just like to add myself that I think what you have set out in terms of our response to this situation is excellent, and it's a huge amount of work I know that's been done by your teams to sort of pull this together in very quick time, and it's excellent that we are still doing prevention work and actually gearing up our prevention work, because obviously that's the best outcome for everybody if we can prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. But I think Linda was absolutely right to start out by saying that this is a failure of government housing policy under the previous government, and a disaster for everybody. It's a disaster for all of the families and households involved, and it's a disaster for council finances up and down the country. We're not alone at all in this situation, sadly. We are one of many councils that are in this situation, and just to assure everybody here, I have been doing my own bit of lobbying as part of my role in District Councils Network. We were discussing this very issue this afternoon at District Councils Network Executive Board meeting, in terms of our lobbying for the new government, as well as trying to work out what are the best policy solutions across the whole of the District Council network going forward. But I think some of the issues that you've described in terms of prevention work, but also the connections to Home Office are absolutely ones that we need to continue to challenge on, because they are impacting quite severely on us. But I think the other thing that I know that we have noted in the report is around Section 21 evictions, and we have got a government now who have said that they will end Section 21 evictions. So I think we will hold them to that, and hope that happens soon. So any other questions or comments? Alex, and then Nigel.
Yeah, absolutely endorse the actions that have been taken, and congratulate Linda and the officers for trying to make the best of a calamitous situation. We're quite right to highlight the impact of the failure to ban Section 21 evictions, because they've been a primary cause of homelessness. And we're also right to highlight what the previous government was doing with people who were highly vulnerable and were being literally thrown out on the street from accommodation that the Home Office decided they would no longer pay for. And I think that's absolutely outrageous at every single level. Literally giving people their belongings and telling them to trot down to the town hall, declare themselves homeless because they had nowhere else to go other than be on the street. I did also want to highlight a particular bugbear of mine, which is part of the demand and supply issue here, but I think it is important. I just, for the purposes of this contribution, did a quick search in the middle of October to find out how many homes are available on I must choose my words carefully, well-known international short lettings website. There are currently 180 houses and flats which you can rent for a short visit to Oxford via that website. Imagine what those 180 homes could be occupied by if they were occupied by families who are currently in this temporary accommodation or worse. And I think the government is right, the new government is right to be rapidly moving to end Section 21 evictions. But if they do that without moving forward with the legislation consulted on but not implemented by the last government, so regulation consulted on but not implemented by the last government on short-term lets, we're going to have an equally serious problem of loss of private rented sector into more short-term lets as more landlords shift across. Two things have to go together or else we're going to be in really serious trouble. That it is a travesty when hundreds of families are in terrible temporary accommodation despite our best efforts, while homes sit empty for most of the time awaiting holidaymakers. That should not happen.
Nigel.
Just first of all, just on the paper, the way it's written, I think the purpose of the report is to seek authorization to establish an emergency temporary procurement framework. I don't think it's to procure an emergency framework. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a bit of a typo gone on there, and it's quite important to get that right because it's reflected in the rest of the paper accurately. Secondly, I couldn't agree more with Alex. I mean, the way the government has behaved about basically throwing people out on the streets who are in Home Office accommodation previous government has put enormous pressure on the system. And there's a case I'm currently involved with where, you know, it's really brought it home to me, the mental health impact of this, which is really significant. I mean, you know, if you move from, albeit maybe a small flat or a small piece of accommodation to living in bed and breakfast or a hotel with a family, you are in effectively 2 rooms at best. And it's just impossible. I mean, it's impossible for the children to do their homework. It's impossible to get any privacy. It completely destroys the quality of life. And I just want to reinforce what Alex said. It's absolutely disgraceful. The third thing I want to say is that I'm pleased that Oaks Place may be able to play some part in this as the council, one of the council companies for which I'm responsible. If we can find a way in which it can help get hold of good quality accommodation from the private sector as part of the solution. It won't be the whole solution, but if it can play its part, I would very much welcome that. And I think we all look forward to seeing a proposal coming to the shareholders at some point in the future soon, where that may be possible. I don't want to prejudge it, but it may be possible. And I hope it's part of the jigsaw puzzle. But the big issue really is the funding, isn't it? You know, that we actually need seriously more money from central government now to deal with this issue and to ensure that it doesn't mean that we have to spend so much money on this that we then have to cut other services to pay for it, which would then just spread the misery onto other people. So that's my thoughts, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, Lubna.
I agree with Nigel as well. And one of my questions was, you know, on page 54, it says 90 units of temporary accommodation have been identified. Does that mean that those accommodation would be available soon?
90 units.
90, yes. What did I say?
Paragraph
9.
16.
Oh, sorry, 90.
Yeah,
Oh,
90.
paragraph 16.
So I believe, yeah, so that's in, basically that paragraph 16 is concerning, we're we're drawing together plans at the moment, both with RP partners and looking at our own stock to see if there's any accommodation that we can change its classification and use as temporary accommodation. So that has real opportunity to deliver really, good quality, especially 90 units of a higher number, but it won't be immediate. Some of the other mitigations in the paper around, is that right? Oh, no, sorry, I apologise. PSL, yes, so 90 is what we're aiming for by the, sorry. So yeah, so just to be clear on the different numbers. So in regards to private sector leasing, so from the private sector, we're approaching 30 units now, and we're aiming for 60 by the end of the year. In terms of the other number, the 90, that's a longer term figure, working with RPs and looking at our own stock. But they just show that we're looking at serious numbers of new TA stock over the next 2 years, probably, to bring online to bring down hotel usage.
Excellent. Just following on from that, I want to emphasize what Susan also said, that the mental and emotional toll that is taken up on families is just through the roof. One of the reasons I am here today is because I believe that more affordable housing and more housing is a human right, that you should be able to, have a future in living accommodation. And I feel that this is one of the #1 calls that I get is on housing. So I just want to thank you officers for your incredible hard work, and also our councillor Cabinet member Linda Smith for her hard work. As with the rest of the cabinet, I know everybody's very sensitive to this, because it's detrimental to the future of our city. And I just want to say that there's so many additional issues, like for example, in temporary accommodation, they don't have access to fridges or food, to a microwave, etc. And it's just become impossible. I have, women crying on the phone on suicide watch, and there's nothing, so everything that you're doing, I'm really, really grateful. And I just wanted to emphasize that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lubna. Thank you for putting the human face on this, which is about, people, the effect it has on people's lives and their health and their long-term health as well. So everything that we can do to get people, stop people from being in temporary accommodation in the first place, but into permanent homes is absolutely to be welcomed. Okay, thank you everybody for your contributions. Nigel, I just wanted to check, the correction you were making, was it right at the top of the report on the purpose of the report?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, so I think you're right, it's slightly garbled, so I think it needs to read, to seek authorisation to establish an emergency temporary accommodation framework for procurement of emergency temporary accommodation, or an emergency framework for the procurement of temporary accommodation, something like that. So can we agree, when agreeing the recommendations, just agree that the rewording of that purpose of the report? So it's set out perfectly in the recommendations, so that's the important bit. So can we agree the recommendations with that slight rewording of the purpose of the report at the top? Everyone happy to agree that? Thank you. And thank you all again very much for the work that you're doing. It's very important. And as Lubna quite rightly said, I think it's why a lot of us are here. So yeah, housing is #1 issue for us. So moving on, it doesn't go away. Annual review of the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. Linda, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is the first annual review of our housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. Just to remind you that our strategy has got 5 strands. The first is providing more affordable homes, and I'm pleased to report that we're on track in terms of targets, in terms of new homes, new affordable homes being built and new homes for social rent being available. Second strand is great homes for All, which includes our work in the private rented sector, groundbreaking work on selective licensing, where we're the only local authority in England where every rented home now needs a license. And it also covers our investment in our own council homes, of which we'll hear more about later. The third strand is about housing for a net zero carbon future. The fourth strand about preventing homelessness, which we've just discussed. And the fifth one, ending rough sleeping, when unfortunately we're unable to prevent homelessness before it begins. So yes, over to the officers if there's anything. So this is an update on the previous year, and we're being asked to agree the action plan for the year ahead. I don't know if there's anything in the action plan that Richard and Nerys would like to draw out for our attention, or any highlights from the past year that you'd particularly like us to hear about this evening.
Over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I suppose maybe I'm more on a negative note, unfortunately. I was just going to highlight that I think one of the more significant updates within the action plan for the year ahead is just trying to capture these. We've just been talking about the risks and challenges the authorities facing. We talk about that in the report, rising homelessness levels. We've got real ambition around our transformation of rough sleeping services, but real challenges there around cost inflation and growing demand, and similar challenges then on the stock side in regards competing demands for investment and only growing expectations from our tenants and from central government. So I think the paper sets out hopefully clearly a huge amount of achievement over the last year, but we just have to keep working harder and harder to continue to make progress in a very difficult picture on the housing and homes front.
Thanks, Richard. Nerys, did you want to add anything? No. Okay. Questions, comments, people? Alex.
Very brief comment. The just it's not the content of the action plan, it's a presentation of it. Landscape things on a small screen, I just literally can't read them. And the software we use means that it's quite difficult on a small screen to actually, and so I can't actually check the thing I wanted to check. What I wanted to say, the sort of more substantive item, was the inclusion in paragraph 5 of the main report of the number of affordable housing units that are being provided by the arrangements we have made with great difficulty since the beginning of the growth deal in 2014, and the fact they're beginning to come to fruition. And the reason I'm pleased about them is twofold. One is because the number is extremely significant, and we've talked about our own delivery, which is extremely significant, but this is, many times bigger. And so is it 7,000 and something, over 7,000 new affordable housing units being delivered through the planning process. So that's the planning system, which is much maligned by the previous government, and a little bit too maligned, in my view, by the current government, actually doing what it's supposed to do, and that was the duty to cooperate being used properly. And I think we need to give some credit to the work that our predecessors as politicians, but also our planning teams and those who negotiated those arrangements have done in order to deliver them. The other thing is that I think it also is something we should be publicising, and that was what I was wanting to look for in the action plan, because I just thought of it and I can't see it. Because what we find in coverage in the local media and pressure groups like CPRE and such like is that the growth deal is characterised as some kind of building of executive mansions for commuters. And it is not. Those additional housing sites identified around Oxford were designed explicitly to deliver affordable and social housing, and that is, thanks to the policies of our surrounding councils, is what they're doing. So I guess the question I would have as part of this is can we make sure that the action plan continues to publicise this as a priority and does so at a corporate level. I'm kind of looking at the chief executive and leader as well, not just at you guys, because I think we need to be extolling the virtues of the growth deal, and also can we make sure that we don't get mealy mouthed and use the phrase affordable housing when we can say social housing, because I believe, and certainly since they've been updated, the local plans of all our surrounding authorities require the majority of this affordable housing to be social housing. I believe that wasn't the case under their old local plans, it is now. So as these sites come forward, they will be providing new social housing. And I think given the tendency for people to dismiss affordable housing as not affordable, not least because much of it isn't around the country, but this is social housing. This is the stuff we said we wanted built. We wanted council housing and housing association homes built, and they are being delivered. And I think we need to be much more upfront about saying that and highlighting it as a success of the efforts of this authority and indeed the authorities around us to deliver much needed new housing, and we shouldn't be ashamed of saying so.
Here. Any other comments or questions? Lubna.
On the document on paragraph 15, it says the social media marketing campaign ran over the winter. Now, the home upgrade grant that was with the partners county council, it says to identify barriers and facilitate uptake. Just to be really clear, when you go through to this application, it's only for people who have no gas or central heating. And then if you do have central heating, it takes you to another partner, and by the way, this is a very lengthy process through the partners. So that's my feedback to you, that it then goes on to Connected for warmth for people who are actual homeowners. And the process takes very long time. And I'll tell you why, because some of them are weather permitted. And so if the intake is very huge, which is likely to be, then that means some of the work doesn't get through. So marketing is one thing. We've got to see how many people have actually benefited from this process. Just want to highlight that, that's all.
Thanks, Lubna. I don't believe we set the rules. I think that's the problem. So I suspect that's why it's a complicated process, but Nerys, you may have further comment.
No, not really, Susan. No, we didn't set the rules, and I think uptake has been relatively low across the board, from what I understand.
Anna.
I think with Hug 2, we actually did way better than more or less anybody else managed to, and actually got like a second tranche of funding because of it. So I think it was actually, it was a relatively, as Lubna said, it was a very relatively small sort of window of people who qualified, but we generally did do quite a good job of getting it out there, and I think we managed to bring some more people into the scheme because of that. So it was actually relatively good news for a small scheme.
But these things can be quite complex to deliver and, as you say, identify the right people. So thank you and well done. Okay, no other questions or comments. I have to say I would agree on the legibility of this report. I've got a printed copy in front of me. I can't read it either, even with my glasses on. So we do need to have a look at how we reproduce that in future, because it's not really helpful if we can't read it. So if we could perhaps even be sent that, I think, separately as an attachment on an email or something that we could actually read, that would be quite helpful. Okay, if we get back to the recommendations, we're being asked to note the progress, approve the adoption of the new strategy action plan for this year, and delegate authority in order to carry it out and update the action plan as required. So everyone happy to do that? Thank you very much. That's great. And thank you very much, both Nerys and Richard, and Kieran, thank you very much online as well. So we are now on to the HRA capital programmes and delegations, and I think we have Peter and Malcolm for this, or no, it's Malcolm, sorry. I'm looking at my cheat list of who's doing what, but rather than looking in front of me. So yes, over to Linda and then over to the two of you.
Thank you. Yes, you'll remember thank you. You'll remember the second plank of housing strategy covered great homes for all. And this report is about the investment we're making in council-owned homes to make them great. So this is money that's already in the budget, capital money, money that's already in the HRA capital budget, £12.5 million, and this report is asking us to authorise the spending of that money through 3 programmes of work, internal works, external works, and communal works. Malcolm's here to tell us more about it and answer any questions we've got.
Over to you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it's a combination of previous budgets and work streams into 3 distinct packages. As Councillor Smith highlighted, it is in the budget, it has been approved previously for the budget. This is asking for the approval to spend. This is a programme for this year. We're working closely with colleagues in ODS to undertake the work. And we're also at the same time developing future programmes for 5-year programmes. So this is very much about this year's work that we can deliver and then with ODS, and then we will be coming back with a 5-year programme to give greater clarity in the longer term. If there's any questions.
Thanks very much. Any questions or comments? Nigel.
Thank you very much for all the hard work on this, and I'm sure ODS will be pleased that there is some certainty around this year, and there'll be certainty for the years ahead when you've done that work. I'm also pleased you've allowed some contingency in here for emergency works, because I mean, I never get over the fact how long suffering some tenants are in this city, frankly. And as a ward councillor, you then talk to them on the doorstep and they tell you about their situation, and they haven't actually become part of any of these programmes necessarily. They're not even aware of them, not even on the list, and therefore we must have some flexibility to be able to respond to that. Those situations when they arise, when they're really, really bad. So I'm pleased that that contingency is in there. So I think that's the right balance. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Lubna and then Alex.
I just wanted to ask about the cladding. I'm sure you are very, you worked really hard on this. I just wanted to check, since Grenfell, like the cladding on this, is there anything that you've checked out specifically?
Yes, certainly, Councillor. This is general homes. It isn't a cladding specific project. This is more to do with roofs, kitchens, but other key component items within the properties. Cladding is a separate issue on the blocks, so that's not actually covered in this particular programme.
But we have done all the relevant checks, and there has been a great deal of work done on cladding on our tower blocks, and with still some more to come. Alex.
Yeah, 2 questions. One relates to communication, both with tenants and with ward members. Clearly, you've identified which properties, because you've actually got it down to the individual number of properties. So what are your mechanisms for informing the relevant tenants, but also the ward councillors, so that they can deal with which properties have been included and which have been not included? So that's the first question. And the second one relates to the client side management of this, and overlaps to some extent with the other. I think many ward councillors will say they find the current process of talking to TMOs about environmental improvements to, say, blocks, somewhat frustrating, because the TMOs are not empowered or able to discuss those, which leaves members, raising an issue on behalf of a tenant about, say, a communal area in a block, and being told it's not a tenancy issue when it clearly is a tenancy issue. So what process? Who is the client side? How will ward councillors be able to manage the relationship with the client? And more broadly, I guess, maybe this is for Linda, but what thoughts do you have about redefining to some extent or loosening the definition of what a TMO is responsible for so that they include these environmental issues both within and immediately next to blocks? Because at the moment it feels as if they've just fallen into space and they become the responsibility of ODS, which is a contractor and not the client, and that seems to me flawed.
Thank you. So the first part of the first question on that is we are, because this is an interim year before the 5-year programme that's being developed, we are also undertaking stock condition surveys, as you may be aware, and therefore there is expected to be change within the programme, and as Councillor Chapman mentioned earlier, there's a big flexibility in there for responding to emergency items that arise in year. So we're working with ODS to develop the programme. Residents will be obviously contacted, and the plan at the moment is that we would look at giving 3 months notice to works where possible. I'm working obviously with tenants. We are taking a more holistic view of properties. So the plan here, because it's an external and internal, so we would be looking to do a roof and windows at the same time. So one scaffold goes up, not twice, so we don't revisit properties for different work streams. So it's very much about working with tenants. The primary benefit will come in the 5-year programme, where we will have forward sight of that. And the plan there is also to engage with both residents and councillors, ward councillors, individually for their ward, to be able to give them that 5-year programme and more detail. The detail is difficult in this year because it is an interim year, and therefore it is subject to considerable change within that particular detail. We do have detail, however, and that is being firmed up via the stock condition survey as we go. So the programme is based on what we know, but it will be subject to significant change. And we're working, as I said, with ODS, who are doing the delivery, the programming of that, for their resident liaison to work with tenants.
So can I seek clarification before you move on to the rest of it? Just picking my ward, because it's my ward. You've identified in Appendix 1 that there are 22 properties in my ward which are going to be part of this programme. Are you saying that it's going to be 22, but you don't know which 22?
No, we have a provisional programme with the addresses, but when we arrive, there will be things, for example, tenants may say, I simply don't want the work to happen, or I can't take the work time off work to do. Yeah. So there will be an adjustment. We also may find that there's more urgent critical works required in other properties. So hence the flexibility needs to be there. So we're prioritising on that. Okay. Sorry.
Carry on, Malcolm, and then I've got Linda and then Nigel.
Thank you. The second part of the question is, sorry, has lost me.
Shall I?
The client contractor bit, and there's the role of the TMOs.
So Linda would like to respond to that. So Linda,
okay.
why don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Alex, I think there's 2 separate issues there that I heard. One was about the TMOs and their role and the authorisations they have. And I think it would be really helpful if Nerys could say a few words about what's happening with that. But secondly, it sounded, what you're concerned about is that the kind of works that were picked up under the Great Estates programme, which has been on pause for the last year or so. But I really want us to get to a situation where those sort of communal improvements, where we have a system where they are prioritised appropriately, where we all know what's on the list and when it's going to happen, and residents can, raise suggestions for work that needs doing, but councillors can as well, but then that is all going into the same place and being prioritised, costed, and carried out in a transparent process and in a fair process across the city. If that relates to what you were asking at all.
Yes, to some extent. I'd just be good to know what that process is.
Yes.
Especially, I don't want to make this a ward issue by any stretch, but for places with disparate stock that don't fall under a state. The Great Estates programme was, to say the least, a non-event, never got any of it. So if there is some central thing, and the things I'm talking about are things like coats of paint in communal areas, which seems to be more of a maintenance issue than a major investment issue. But those are regarded, and TMOs will say that's not a TMO issue because it's outside the front door. That's the issue. And the other question was about client and contractor and how we avoid ODS marking their own homework.
So on that first part, the programme will be designed. It's a starting point for discussion on the 5 years. That will give us a base programme to start from. That can then be shared and it can be consulted on, and it will be. This year is a slightly hand to mouth in that as an interim year, but the 5-year programme definitely is going to cover everything. The Great Estates programme, we want to build on that good work. We want to make sure that there is that longer term plan so that everybody has the investment in the estates wide, not specific blocks and so on, and everything is then covered. And it is a condition based programme, or it will be. And therefore, that will mean that we deal with the worst case properties first in a holistic view. In terms of clienting, we have with property services, we will be looking at surveyors managing that. We will have clerk of works form type of working with area surveyors that are being put in place at the moment. The area surveyor model, which is coming into place, we are recruiting at the moment for some of those, some are in place, work closely with the TMOs. And the area survey, if you like, is more of a property version of a TMO. So therefore, they are there for residents to speak to, for ward members to contact, and they will be that front facing for property to make sure nothing falls through any kind of gaps.
Thank you, it's very helpful. Nigel.
To Alex's point, around the information then. So we've got a number of properties per ward here designated. I mean, we are kind of grown-up people in the sense that we know things move around, but it would be very helpful to have a list of where you're starting from, okay? So we got a sense of, because, we do meet people who say we're in this terrible situation with our kitchen or our bathroom, and it helps enormously if we were aware if they're on the list or not, to be honest with you. And I think it would just make communication so much better. And the second thing is, I'm assuming the TMOs know who the 33 in Cutslow and Sunnymead are, or the 45 in Donington are. Do they know that?
They don't at the moment because
no, but would they?
They will do, yes.
So they will have this list in their PDA or whatever, and that would also help them also deal with tenants' inquiries. I just think we've just got to up our game here in terms of communication about this, because it's a generally good story, this. I think it's some really good work, but if we don't know about it, we can't deflect stuff away from you and answer it quickly on behalf of the tenants. We have to, go through the whole rigmarole of sending lots of questions in about it, when actually if we had the information, we could do the job for you and help you. It's a partnership, and it needs to be seen that way.
Thanks, Nigel. Nerys, you wanted to come back in.
I was just going to come and just on the Great Estates work, I was just going to connect it through to really to the consumer standards and to the kind of neighbourhood standard in particular, where that standard will set out really how the Great Estates and the kind of the kind of green spaces, etc., of our kind of estates looks like, and they will be regulated in that way. So I think some of that will go in there, but equally, I think I'll just move on to, we are doing lots of work in landlord services at the moment around the future of that service, and for that service to also be reflecting the Social Housing Act and our compliance with that Act, and working on those principles of knowing your tenants, knowing their needs and knowing their homes. And in answer to your question, Councillor Hollingsworth, so that knowing where those homes are, which ones are we working on this year, understanding maybe the vulnerabilities of those tenants in those homes, so that we can sort of gear up our TMO response to support them, through that work. And then I think that will bring the TMO work and the property side closer together, which is an aspiration really for the reorganisation and some of the work that we're going to do in the future. So it speaks to the Social Housing Act, the expectations of the regulator of us, and there's more to come on that, which we'll clarify in the coming months.
going to slightly unfairly pick up on something you said, Malcolm, which was that you were saying if you went to a tenant and they didn't want the work to happen, then we might not do the work. I have every sympathy with the idea of going to tenants and making sure that we are working around their needs, whatever those needs might be, including their work and their availability to allow people in and out of their homes. But ultimately, we do have a responsibility for our property, and particularly where it comes to safety issues, I'm assuming that we do actually have a right to do the work. And I just wanted to kind of understand where those lines lay.
So yeah, absolutely. So it's a fine point of balance with working with residents on that, and that's where the TMOs definitely come in, and we work very collaboratively on those. So again, when we have a program, the draft program, which is what we have at the moment, which is how we arrive at a costing, that is then shared with ODS, which has been, and we work to finalise that. And ODS will produce a detailed program of delivery for that. When we've received that, that's when we can share that in more detail. And that's part of the resident liaison within the contractor is then able to work with residents and actually encourage them. And we will come across issues that we will need additional support, which we'll give. Sometimes that can be about moving a property from 1 year perhaps into another. It's not about not doing the work, it is about doing the work, but supporting the tenants in a way that's manageable.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I think that's helpful. Lubna? Yep.
Just wanted to also have a point in that. So if, say, someone says they don't want to do it and you're working around their availability and you said that you prioritise, so would that be in the 5-year term or in the interim?
It would be it's obviously there's a significant number, so it's quite complex. It could be in the interim, but it could move into the 5-year. It would depend on the type of works, whether it's a safety concern, is it a damp and mold issue, that all of these sort of things that need to be prioritised. So we work with the tenants wherever we can to try and accommodate. It's not always possible, specifically if it is a health and safety concern, and mindful that we need to be remaining compliant with our duty constantly. So yes.
Lubna.
Just a really quick point is like in Blackwood Leys, for example, when me and Linda have been going round, we've noticed that there's significant airflow issues. So like damp and these issues. So this is all going to be covered in this strategy, isn't it? So yeah, I really look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lubna. Right, I'm conscious of time, and I'm sure other people will be as well. I'm hoping we can move to the recommendations on this report now. I think we've had a really good discussion on it. We're being asked to approve the HRA capital programme and the appropriate procurement processes, and the usual delegations are being offered to us as well. So can we approve all those recommendations, please? Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much, both of you. We are now on to the Citizens Experience Strategy Progress Report. Over to you, Nigel, and I believe we're joined by Helen and Vicky online.
We are indeed, and it's Helen and Vicky have done all the work. So first I'll start by thanking them very much for their continued passionate commitment in this area. It's a year since we published the strategy, and I asked to have a stock take on where we were after a year. And I think it's fair to say it's a pretty positive story. A lot of the things we set out to do, we've actually achieved, and we've still got more to do. But I'm particularly pleased that we continue to get very high scores when independent examiners come in and look at our citizen experience work, and particularly our customer focus. And secondly, that we did launch a new website, which is absolutely critical, and we are in the top 10 usually of 30 local authorities when we get assessed for both our telephony, our face-to-face, and our online work. And we need to stay there and hopefully get to the top of the pile rather than being just in the top 10. I mean, the report is full of quite crunchy initiatives and ideas. And I think in the next year, we will see us tackling some of the issues we haven't yet tackled, such as being able to pay for things online. I mean, people expect to pay for things online now, but we can't really do that. So I think that would be a big leap forward. I think that, we need to make sure that people can order things online. So at the moment, we've got still issues around garden waste and things of that kind where you have to go to the customer centre. So there are things we can do, Chair, to make it better. And I hope that will also then lead us to be in a position where we can make some efficiencies in time for the new financial year. Because there are quite big efficiencies in this area slated as part of the medium-term financial plan. But I'm pleased with the progress and the commitment of the team, and they've got a very clear work plan for this next 11 months, and I expect to see further progress in that period. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Helen and Vicky, did you want to add anything?
If I may, Chair, just to say that this particular strategy is more wide-ranging than strategies that we've had previously. It's about making sure that all of the, not just our forward-facing services, but all of the council is aligned to our principles, and that we actually embrace other organisations and groups in the community so that we all work together to provide the right support and get that early intervention, which I think is so critical for helping those most vulnerable. And yeah, just wanted to say that really, and just happy to take any questions that you may have. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Helen. Has anyone got any questions or comments? Okay, Lubna and then Linda.
I mean, when I've been door knocking and I found some people do have some language barriers. So for example, if someone's schizophrenic and they're living with an elderly couple, they have sometimes when they're going through their own challenges in life, coming in and out of hospital. And for example, when we were flooded recently, there were households that have been affected quite severely. And as a result of the long-term going works with our contractors, sometimes some things are not always seen to the end. And if it is, it's a really long process. I just wanted to ask you if you were aware of that and if you pick up on cases where there are language barriers and what's being done to address it.
Thanks, Lubna. Let me take Linda as well, and then you can address both of those together. Thank you.
Thanks. When will council tenants be able to report repairs online?
Helen, that sounds like one for you, I think, I'm afraid.
Sorry, I'm fighting to get off mute. So yeah, I'll take both of those. So we do have a contract with a company to help provide translation services. But obviously there are other ways that if you find members of your community that are struggling to get their voices heard, then obviously contact our contact centre. We've got community champions who work in the communities as well, so that we've got a range of ways that we can hopefully work alongside members of the community to make sure that we're grappling with those right issues. And of course we do have we work really closely with our advice agencies in our across our city centre area. So if you come across those, then please just make them known to. I would say your first port of call perhaps would be your locality officers, or come through the contact centre. We will make sure that we're working with the agencies, etc., that we can do to bring that to a positive conclusion. And the other thing to say is that we are working on a portal, that's what we're calling it, for our residents to be able to log their housing repairs. We've got a couple of hiccups at the moment, which we're just finalising, and then we will be able to do a soft launch of that. I don't know that we've got a date yet, but that I'm understanding is imminent.
That sounds like excellent news. So thank you very much, Helen. Trains have delivered, our deputy leader. So you have to sit where you're told. Yeah.
It was somebody else online. Cross country, the service isn't very good. I don't know.
Luckily, we've got a new transport secretary who's definitely going to sort it out. So apologies for the slight interruption, Helen, but thank you very much for that response. I'll go to Nigel now.
Yes, Helen's answered the questions very well. Thank you. Just on your flooding issue, I have a number of cases of yours that are running at the moment where we've almost got to the finishing line, So I'll let you know where we are, but we're 90% of the way there, but it's taken a bit of time as they've been multifaceted. To be honest with you, it's not really about customer experience. This is more about housing, to be honest with you, but I'm just for the record say that they are absolutely being dealt with.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Okay, I'm keen that we now move to the recommendations on this report, which are to note the positive progress which has been made and agree the revised action plan. Can we do that, please? Thank you. It's great. And Ed, you'll be delighted to know that you've arrived just in time to move your report, which is the DLUC productivity plan for Oxford City Council, which I was just planning my wording on, but then you walked through the door. So over to you.
Thanks, Nigel, and actually Helen have been a great assistance in producing this document. The background is that the government insisted on, the government gave us a bit of extra money compared to what it was intending to give us in the last finance round. It was nothing like enough to meet the challenges that local authorities faced. But their price for even releasing this extra pittance was that our officers spend time writing a report. By the time it was filed, that government was on its way out, in a way few will lament. This is the fruit of our officers' labours, which will be sent to government. I think we've mentioned several times that particularly annoying aspect of this was that the government helped us in defining waste. It was things like having active trade unions in the workplace and having a focus on equality and diversity in our workforce. We don't regard either of those things as wasteful. We regard our trade unions as excellent partners, and we strive for a more equal workforce and one which reflects the diverse communities in our city. But we've made that clear actually in our comments in the report by challenging some of the government's premises, and I rather suspect some of those points of analysis will be seen differently by the new government, and hopefully the new government will also see differently the need for this particular report in the future, so it will be simply a collector's item. In fact, sometimes we sometimes sign things at raffles, Susan, or auction them off. Maybe the cabinet can sign copies of this ridiculous report, and we'll flog it off at a Labour Party fundraiser.
Yes, well, I certainly think it's a great deal politer than the one I heard about from Devon. So yes, anyway, in terms of a response to government. So thank you. I don't think we should waste too much time on this. I'm quite sure that the government minister, not sure which the lucky one is who's receiving these now, but I doubt he or she will be wasting too much time on them. So can we note and approve the return? Thank you very much. We now move on to the City Council Corporate Strategy, which is an important document, but actually one that's kind of feels like it's been before us several times because it has. So we have been through a consultation process and we have obviously responded to that consultation process, and it was a very good and thorough consultation process, and I have met with the other group leaders to discuss this. It's been through scrutiny several times. It's been through the Parish Councils Forum. I feel I've discussed it many times, and Claire and Mish have discussed it far more times than I have. It is, however, as I said, a very important document because this is basically what we are going to do and the priorities and the kind of values, if you like, that sit behind what we're going to do over the next 4 years. And obviously this, as I said right back at the beginning when I was responding to the scrutiny recommendations, it's obviously what also informs our budgeting process. So, the priorities as set out in here are the council's priorities when it comes to setting our budget. And so for the two things interact together. There aren't huge changes in our priorities from compared to previous years. Our priorities remain about having good affordable homes, a strong fair economy, thriving communities, zero carbon Oxford, and a well-run council to deliver all of those good things. We have made sure that we have focused in a little more, I think, in this strategy, it would be fair to say, than in previous incarnations, to try and make sure that we're not giving officers a list of priorities as long as my arm, but are actually trying to make sure that the overarching priorities are just that, and they really are a sort of, you know, global view, as it were, of what needs to be done. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't plenty of council business that would fit underneath some of these overarching priorities, which will continue to be delivered by the various different services in the council, and are very important, but you know, they might not be set out precisely in this strategy. I think that's probably more than enough from me. I'd just like to thank Claire and Mish for the huge amount of work that's gone into this, and over to you.
Very little to add. I think it would be worth just highlighting the strategy will be accompanied, as has been the case over the past few years, by an annual business plan. So we've already presented the business plan for the current year, which I think sits fully and squarely in line with the strategy that are now fully developed, and there will be subsequent business plans. And then to partner the strategic objectives and as a way of ensuring that we understand our performance in delivering against these outcomes, we will bring to August Cabinet a separate paper on what could be characterised as corporate level KPIs.
Thanks for that, Mish. That's a reminder. Has anyone got any questions or comments on this document? Okay, you've just answered the questions. That's good news, Mish. So that means, therefore, that we can move directly to the recommendations, which are to note the consultation, agree the revisions made in response to that consultation, delegate authority to various people to make further minor amendments, and then to recommend the adoption of the strategy to council. Can we adopt those recommendations, please? Thank you very much, everybody. On that, we are nearly there. We are moving on to item 16 on the agenda, which is the financial outturn report. So, Ed, I have you and Nigel. So, over to you.
Cheers. Well, we'll start with the good news, Susan, which is when we look at the general fund outturn, we have a favourable variance of £3.9 million, which we're recommending transferring into the risk reserve. Unfortunately, I can't stop there. There's some other news as well. I mean, there were some other areas of underspend which are outlined in the report, but I think there was some that masks the situation where we're slightly in deficit compared to our plans because of the payment of an ODS dividend, which was very, very welcome, £4.5 million, which had been anticipated at roughly that level in roughly that timescale, but we haven't budgeted for it or accounted for it because, of course, we weren't sure when the exact size and when it would arrive. So if you take that off, there is an underlying pressure. One of those is one which has probably been discussed already tonight. Actually, is quite well worn around temporary accommodation, and that's clearly something we're aware of. There's some service pressures, for example. Around the contact centre, Nigel and I have spoken about that, and I think there are some good reasons to believe that they will be resolved. So that's good. Then there's one which actually I do just want to, I think, ought to flag here. It's a sort of technical thing around local cost of benefits. Some of that is that the government is very tight when it comes to any local authority error. But the other one is around a rather complicated issue in relation to supported accommodation providers, where if you work with a charity which isn't a registered provider, then there's a significant additional cost. And I think here it's set out as being £1.6 million. In the past, I think we have approached the county council and maybe the organisation itself about whether there's something we can do about that, whether we can support it, encourage it to become a supported accommodation provider, a registered provider itself. But really, that's not, in the context of a £24 million-ish net budget, £1.6 million because of the wrong status of our supported accommodation provider just, isn't, I think, sustainable. Different bits said on the interest side of things. Going forward, actually, interest rate levels will be slightly to our benefit in our financial planning. In terms of capital, there is higher slippage than we'd have liked to have seen, and it's the usual mixture of things where really we could do nothing about it. Project delays where the delay is entirely outside our control. Also loans to companies, particularly OX Place, where you can't be certain of the pace of development. Yes, we can plan for those things and take them into account in our financial planning. We are now doing that because we put in a quite significant a factor where we anticipate that things may, some things will slip based on our past experience, and then include that in our budget planning accordingly. But also, I think still there probably is optimism bias in the system. I note that the finance panel are going to give this a run round when they meet, I think, next week, and that's reasonable and welcome. Slight favourable variance on the HRA as well, which is welcome, but again, underneath that, there are also some pressures, notably on in the repairs area. And I think, in particular, one thing I know Linda's working on is looking at the amount of repair work which is classed as an emergency and whether work can be better planned. So that's a bit of a flavour of it. Nigel may well have points to add.
Oops. Thanks very much, Ed. And Nigel?
No, I was going to say, I think Ed has adequately covered all of the areas, actually, but happy to take any comments.
Thanks very much. Comments and questions? Well, it really was very thorough. It was a very thorough introduction, Ed. So thank you very much. Short. Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, well, if there are no further questions or comments, then can we note the financial outturn and agree the carry forward requests? So everyone happy to agree those? Thank you very much. Right, on to the final report of the agenda, and I will go through each of the appointments to each of the outside bodies in detail. No, I won't. So please can we note this report and approve the appointments to charities, trusts, community associations and other organisations set out in this report. I do not need to cover it in any great detail. Can we agree that? Yeah. Thank you very much. Right, we do still have the minutes of the last meeting, I believe, if I can find the right page in my agenda to agree. So yeah, agenda item 18 is the minutes of the meeting on the 12th of June. Can we agree them as an accurate record? Fantastic. And we did have a confidential appendix, which was the financial. Yeah. So leisure investment, does anyone need to discuss that? No, in which case I declare the meeting closed. Thank you all very much for your attendance.